Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric and our continuing series, the Unported Playlist, where I take a look at my favorite unported arcade games of all time. And because this is the spooky season, we're going to be talking about Silent Hill the Arcade today. It is a spin-off of the main Silent Hill franchise, and it does have a small tie back to Silent Hill 2 in the Note of the Little Baroness, but otherwise it stands on its own as an arcade light gun shooter in the Silent Hill universe. I love arcade light gun games, I love Silent Hill, which means I'm going to probably love this one. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe, that notification bell definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But without further ado, let's get into the town of Silent Hill and let's kick the game right off. Now this is unlike any Silent Hill game you've ever played before, and it's also unlike pretty much every other light gun game I've played before as well. It's unlike Silent Hill because it's not a third-person survival horror game, it's a first-person on-rails light gun shooter, and that is a big genre change. The second reason why this doesn't feel like many light gun games is this game is incredibly long. It takes over an hour to complete, and in arcades you could save with Konami's e-amusement pass. This game feels like it was 100% destined for the Wii to come home as a port, but it didn't do very well in arcades and Konami seemed to have abandoned it. But it's got all the trappings and hallmarks of a game that was always meant to be ported home, and this would make perfect sense on the Wii, both graphically as well as using that Wii controller to be able to have the reticle on screen. But if you know Silent Hill, it's very interesting to see it from a first-person perspective outside of PT from Hideo Kojima when that demo dropped. This is the first time really that you saw something like Silent Hill in full first person, and it does really have the look and the feel and the sound of the town. The developers did an amazing job on that, and a few members of Team Silent apparently helped Konami's arcade division make the game, but this really isn't made by the same team that you would expect to be making the console games. But it is a good marriage of both Konami's arcade side and the home console side all at once. But I do love the pivot to a first-person light gun shooter, and I think Silent Hill and Konami do it a lot better than the Resident Evil light gun games. I would say that Silent Hill handily beats the Resident Evil Dead Aim series any day of the week and twice on Sundays. Believe me, comment down below and tell me if you disagree. Just be nice about it because they're just opinions, folks. But every time you hear that ship's foghorn in the distance, you're going to go to the alternative Silent Hill, and everything is going to be much more grungy and dingy and rusty and horror-filled than you would expect. But honestly, it starts pretty horror-filled, and it just gets even more horror from there. And of course, it wouldn't be Silent Hill without the nurses with their faces covered, and a lot of the enemies that you're familiar from the main franchise are going to be here, and of course they are. It is still a Silent Hill game. They want to still tie that universe together. And all of the enemies move with such unnatural cadences and kind of jerk around and lurch. The aim can be relatively hard, not in a way that you're not aiming correctly, you just need to read the enemies and see where they're going. And at a few stages in the game, you're going to find some weapons to pick up, and there's going to be different routes through the game and different characters to save, because this does have multiple endings, including a UFO ending for fans of that sort of thing out there. In this playthrough, I got the best ending, and the long play will show that to you, but I will tell you right off the top, I'm going to cut a lot of the story and ending out. If you've never played this game and want to go in blind, this video just shows you the environments, but gives you very little of the actual story. And I'm not saying it's a masterful story. Every single console Silent Hill game has a better story than the arcade, but it still does work in the context of Silent Hill as both a franchise and an arcade game that stands alone. But just be aware that if you want to play the game, I'm really not showing you much that's happening here. And I love that he says that she thinks she just imagined that sound. Like, there's not all of these weird things going on. Sometimes the dialogue, both the voice acting and the written lines, make no contextual sense to the game. He just said that it was in her imagination she heard weird sound while these monsters are rushing at him and he's shooting them. It would not be unbelievable to think there's weird sounds because there's literal monsters running at you, and of course it wouldn't be a Silent Hill game if our friend Pyramid Head didn't pop up very shortly. I just think it's funny that he doesn't believe there was a weird sound when this happens directly afterwards. If this happens to you, you should probably believe anything else could and would be possible. But this game has a very unique and interesting soundtrack, just like Silent Hill, the console game, because it's less music and more environmental ephemeral sounds. So go ahead and listen for 45 seconds and I'll be right back.
What is this thing? Grab that pipe! What? Hurry! Get away!
I love that the soundtrack is so minimal. It's mostly made up with creaking metal and other machines whirring in the background because it really does work for the universe of Silent Hill. If it had been actual horror sort of sounding arcade music, I think it would have actually detracted a little bit from the overall presentation and vibe that this game is going for. And if there's one thing it's definitely going for, it is a vibe. It's bringing in so much of the Resident Evil universe you know and love while doing different things with it. And I love that one nurse in the background has been given a gun versus having a pipe to hit you with. It's rare that enemies are going to have a gun until you get to a certain level, but it is kind of fun to see them sort of shoot from the hip and basically not aim whatsoever at you. And I will say the aiming, all of the actual light gun mechanics are quite sound and really enjoyable. I don't really have any complaints about the game's mechanics, and I always wonder why this game was not reviewed better. Now I get it's always subjective, and I will say that in spots you're just definitely going to be moving like 20 seconds through a hallway without any dialogue and without any enemies. But I do feel like that's down to potential pacing to have this be an actual console home port. It wants to let you get a little bit more of a breather, and it's intended to have saving in it so that you didn't have to play from start to finish at home if you didn't want to. I would assume a port would give you like 5 credits, and then after that you'd probably have to keep continuing until you unlocked more credits. We do use an elevator key here, and the game's going to have branching pathways that I will show you in a little bit. But I will say that artistically, I just love what this game does. In this boss battle right here, we're going to turn around, and then suddenly from this sky, this giant monster just going to perch onto that building. With all of the different filters, with that pseudo film grain effect over the top, with all the debris blowing around, this is just a total vibe, and I'm 100% there for it. Even though this game is running in 4x3, even though it's running on 2008 PC hardware, the art designers and the modelers did an amazing job of tying together a universe in this game. And you'll see here that it is going to give you some of that breathing room that I do think was intended for console. But as this winged creature just swoops in, and you can see his weak spot being the heart right in front of his chest glowing, it just works. I love the camera motion, I love the motion blur, everything feels so cinematic about this game. It's just a joy to watch it move around the screen, and I love all the muted colorways they use as well. It just works, and I'm 100% there for it. I even love the cutscenes, but don't worry, I'll give you a little bit of janky voice acting later, because I'm 100% going to tell you that this game has that voice acting jank you know and love from a Japanese light gun game. But you'll see we rescued the little girl here, and now we get to move on to another area in the game, which is going to be a prison. And in some small ways it does retread territory you've seen in previous Silent Hills, but because you're seeing it from a first-person perspective, it's going to feel and look a lot different than you're used to, and each level is going to introduce new and different enemies. I will say that sometimes these little slugs and the cockroaches jumping on the screen can be relatively cheap ways to kind of take that life bar away, because you start with 100 points and it goes down from there. But of course it is an arcade game, Konami wanted those quarters and they had to get them somehow. But this worm question mark, I definitely think it's supposed to be something else, and there's definitely an enemy later in the game that's 100% supposed to be exactly what you think it is, pops out here with all of those teeth ready to kill you, but you can jump behind this door until he rushes you from another area. And don't worry, if you just see a worm or maybe an eel and you don't see what I see, the game's going to be very specific about what this actually is in a few moments, because I don't think there's really any confusing what they're going for. But I told you I'd let you listen to some janky voice acting, because there's nothing jankier than English spoken dialogue in a Japanese light gun game for arcade. So go ahead and listen to this cutscene for like the next 25 seconds or so, and I'll come back and show you a lot more Silent Hill. Enjoy.
This must be... Ryan?
Definitely some janky voice acting, and I love that he knew that was Ryan even though the body was covered up by a tarp. But this worm definitely has a certain look and vibe to it. But of course, the Silent Hill franchise has always been kind of using that innuendo or sort of otherwise double entendre design aesthetic to articulate certain concepts and themes that you can't outright directly show on screen. And when you get further into the prison, I love that the colors just get so intense. It's such a fun look to bring sort of those really vibrant crimson reds and those sort of neon blues into the color palette. It really does help the enemies stand out a little bit more, because they are all basically monotone gray, and you use those colors to kind of spot where they are. And you do get different routes in the game as well, and that doesn't really affect the ending as far as I can tell. All you need to do to get the best ending is save all your friends in the story. If you let some of them die, you're going to get either a good ending, a worse ending, or the worst ending of all, and the UFO ending. If you really want to try to figure that one out, go ahead and look up how to do it, because it is quite the process. But you'll see here as we get into the next boss battle, the character design is just spectacular in this game. I love everything they did with all the modeling. Not so much the human characters, but the boss characters you're going to see coming up shortly. And I do love this boss because it looks like the girl that we're currently trying to rescue, and also the girl that fell off the little baroness in Toluca Lake. It is basically just a blonde-haired doll with all these Hellraiser-style spikes coming out of her that also kind of moves around like some sort of feral animal or a spider, except with 4 less legs. Now if you take a look at the top of the screen, you're going to see George there, and there's going to be a 4-digit counter counting down. If you do not defeat the boss before that counter reaches 0, George dies and the best ending is out of reach. Every single boss basically has this counter, and you need to 100% manage the time if you want to see the best ending. Well, I would say the good ending is like 95% of the best ending, so if you don't get the best one, maybe you don't really have to replay the game to see that last like 10 seconds of what's going on. But from a design perspective, I just love this boss, how big it is, how large it is, and that it literally lifts you up into the air for the final sequence of it, and just throws these roaches out of her mouth, basically vomiting roaches up at you. It's weird, it's unique, and it's 100% Silent Hill, and I absolutely love it. As we move on to the next area, it's another retread of a mall, and of course Silent Hill loves its malls, but it's mostly the enemies in this area that I find absolutely hilarious in all of these Silent Hill ways. Now I'm not going to say what I think they are, I don't want to throw up any flags, but if you can't figure out what they're going for here, I would be very, very surprised. And if you want to comment what you think they are, I would even be a little worried about what words you'd use to make sure they don't flag on the filter. But that's just Silent Hill, that's what's expected of it, and it's not done in any sort of immature way. The series has always had those kind of overtones to it, and Silent Hill the arcade is no different. That just feels so hyper-literal to me. It is just one of what you think it is, running around on 2 legs in a shopping mall. But of course, a subway, also a very good location for Silent Hill. And I particularly love the aesthetic in here. Just those lights flashing in and reflecting off of the ground. Kind of like a real train. Like if you're going underground and you see all of those flashes from the lights on the walls, or if it's an electrified train, the little sparks. This looks like a grungy, gritty New York City subway when I lived in Brooklyn back in like 2005. They weren't clean, they weren't well lit, and outside of monsters, kind of looks like the exact same vibe. But of course, it's always going to be showing you something different. If you're afraid of rabbits, this is definitely the time you want to turn the game off. But I just love these enemies. And these giant amusement park mascots that are just running around with chainsaws, wrenches, and shotguns and hatchets. They 100% want to kill you, and it is creepy. Of course, it's kind of funny, and of course, it's kind of cute. They're pink bunnies. But let me tell you, they are ruthless, and they're 100% going to absolutely destroy you as quickly as they possibly can. But it is a good design choice as well to have them be bright pink against this very dark background of this amusement park, which is basically taking place inside of the girl's imagination, at least if you believe the story. It works in the context of what's going on, and I just love it. It's such a strange pivot. Everything up until this point has been horror monsters. Now suddenly we have these pink bunny rabbits trying to shotgun us down in an amusement park. But at the same time, it feels perfectly like it fits within the realm of Silent Hill, because Silent Hill can show you anything because it's all part of somebody's mental journey. So it means that if we have pink bunny rabbits with shotguns, that's what makes sense in the context of the story, and I 100% agree with it and appreciate it. But the big question about this game is it good or not? Because if you listen to reviews on the internet, people are going to say it's not necessary and it's not very good. And here's my opinion. If you love the Silent Hill franchise, if you've played all the mainline entry games, I think you're going to enjoy this a lot, unless you do not like arcade light gun shooting games. If you like arcade light gun shooters, but you're not a big fan of Silent Hill, there's a decent amount for you here to enjoy on the sort of light gun perspective side of things. Now, if you're like me and you both love light gun arcade games and Silent Hill, well then this just has everything I crave, and I'm into it. Leave me a comment down below, tell me if you ever played it. It is relatively a rare cabinet in the US and Japan, but I'd be curious to see if you know where one is. Short of that, I'll be back next week with more horror arcade goodness, but I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.
Hey, what do you think that means?
Yeah, I don't understand.